So in the first episode, at the end of painting the model, I mentioned there was a bit of dust in a couple of spots that needed to be removed. Now the body had enough time to cure, so I could start removing it. Now I'm not going to go polishing it up to perfection. I'm just going to go for good enough in this case, as I'm kind of over this build already. A lot of things in between have happened and it is taking way too long, so I just need to finish it. I'm of course going to do the best job I possibly can in a limited time frame, so I'm just going to polish it out a little bit here, remove the main bulk of the dust that was in there, and trying to fix it as best I can within a reasonable time. So I went through various stages of sanding, polishing, compounding, and all that stuff around it, and in the end I decided that wasn't good enough, so I took out even more polishing compound and some foam pads. I will leave links in the description down below to finish it off even better and remove those bigger scratches. So with that said and done, the polishing is completed. Now I know it's not perfect, there are still a couple bumps and lumps in the paint, but I'm not going to spend another couple of hours trying to fix that. In this case, I'm just happy that I got most of it out and it looks good. Now that the polishing has been completed, I could move on to the next step, and that was fitting the front window. The main kit window that I'm using from the Hasegawa set is of course for a 4-door version, and that's not going to fit in this coupe. So the rear section was cut off, and now I'm cutting off the side windows too. I decided just to leave them open so you can still see a bit of the interior that I've put a bit of time into, but most of it was just cut out and then sanded to shape. I fitted it a couple of times, adjusted it even more, and then of course in the end it fit perfectly fine. It took about an hour or so with a bit of removal, sanding, refining, test fitting, and going over that a couple more times before it all fit in. But it was well worth it, as now the front windshield fits nicely too. It was then masked off with the supplied masks from the Hasegawa kit, and then the edges were painted black. And while I still had the black paint in the airbrush anyway, I figured I'd quickly mask off all of the molding on the side for the rubber seals and paint those in the same black too. After I let the paint cure for a bit, I could move on to tinting the windows. Now I tried this in multiple different ways, but the rear window and the side windows aren't really the normal plastic. The rear one is a resin and the side ones are a super thin, clear Lexan, I guess. I'm not really sure what the material is, but they are new and not the same kit plastic. So I tried painting them with some Tamiya smoke, but that just didn't want to stick. I also tried painting it with some other smoke colors, but those didn't want to work either. So I moved on to my third method, and that was the clear smoke finish from Hasegawa. They sell these in small sheets. It's pretty expensive, and it is pretty much just a tint foil like you would use on your real car, but then a bit thicker and a bit stickier. So it's pretty much not the same stuff you'd use on your real car, but anyway, it is the same kind of thing. But then again, it's not, if you can follow me. Probably not, but that's fine. I'm not following it anymore either. So basically, it is just tint foil, but then not the same as on real cars, but kind of, but then again, not. It doesn't really look all that great. It does have a bit of an orange peely texture in it, but in this case, it was all I had, and it worked pretty well. The finish is just not as good as I desire, but it's the only option I had. So once that was applied, cut to shape of the windows itself, and let to cure for a bit, I could move on to gluing the clear parts in. I just added a bit of super glue on all the edges to hold them in place, and then went around all the other edges with a 2-part epoxy just to seal it all in completely and give it a super nice sturdy bond with the rest of the body, and also close up that seal around the edges so no light can bleed through it. I gave the epoxy a couple of hours to cure and then moved on to putting the interior in as well, which was finished in the earlier episodes. And once that interior tub was placed in, I also sealed those edges in completely with some more epoxy to give it a super tight bond again, and also to seal out any of the light from the outside to the interior to prevent that from shining in. I then set the body aside overnight to let the epoxy fully cure before handling it again the next day. So this time the interior is fully sealed and finished off, and I can move on to some of the exterior details. The new taillights that are supplied with the USCP kit fit pretty well, but since I did apply a pretty heavy clear coat, it didn't fit as well as I wanted it to, so they needed to be sanded down just a little bit along the edges until they fit perfectly, and I could move on to painting them and also adding some finish on the inside of the buckets for a chrome reflective surface that the actual lights have as well. So I'm using some Hasegawa mirror tint foil for this. This is similar to bare metal foil, but then a lot thinner and also a bit shinier. It's a lot stickier too and doesn't conform to shapes as well as the bare metal foil does, but the reflective finish is a lot better. So I just wanted to try that out for this, and it actually ended up working really well. I cut out a small piece in the general shape of the bucket that I'm covering in this, then put it in place and started pressing it down. Once it was firmly in place, I went along the edges with a knife to remove the excess material and moved on to the other side. The headlight buckets also needed to be painted with a chrome finish, so the small side marker pieces I was able to do with the mirror tint foil from Hasegawa, but the main inside of the bucket, that was a bit too complicated of a shape, so I just took out some Molotow chrome, applied it with a brush, and filled it all in nicely. So with the buckets now finished, I could move my attention to the actual lights themselves, or at least the lenses themselves, and those were painted with a clear orange on the side. And for the tail lights, the top section was painted with clear orange, and the lower section was then painted with a clear red, with a small section left open for the reversed light just to be a clear finish. Once the paint was cured, I could carefully glue them all in place with a bit of crystal clear from Microscale Industries. I removed some of the excess glue that squeezed out with my thumb, and you can just use a small wet paper towel as well. Once the glue is still really wet, it is really easy just to remove. I then gave it a bit of time to cure and moved on to applying a clear smoke finish to the taillights. In the end, after painting them, they were still a bit too bright. I looked up some reference material and watched a couple clips from the movie, and they seemed to be a bit dull and darker than the standard taillights. So a couple layers of smoke were applied just to tone them down a bit and make them blend in with the exterior a bit more and not just shine out as much as they did. Once that was completed, I let that cure before handling the body again, so I don't of course accidentally touch it and leave a nice fingerprint, and could start by gluing on the side mirrors. On both the front and rear bumper, there needs to be a bit of mesh on the inside, so I just quickly made a small template with some masking tape and a permanent marker, then transferred that onto some spare sheet of mesh that I had from an old Revell kit that I built a couple years ago. Back in the day, a lot of these Revell kits came with a small square sheet of mesh, so that's really easy just to keep aside in the spare parts box for occasions like this. So the tape was just transferred onto it, it was cut out, again carefully placed into position, and of course I added some glue to help it stay permanently. And in order to finish off the exterior things, one of the bigger parts that still needs to be applied was the rear wing. So the main section was glued on first, and then that top section of the wing was also carefully placed after that lower section had fully cured. And the final piece to place on the exterior for now is the sunroof. That was tinted and painted the same way that the rear ones, or the rear windows were at the earlier stages of the video, and was now just carefully glued in place. And with that said, the exterior for this part is pretty much finished. In the next video, I will move my attention to the chassis and also a couple other surprises for the entire build, but I won't go into that all too much for now. You'll just have to wait till the next episode. Now again, I just want to make it very clear, the exterior on this one is not perfect. It has a couple blemishes in the paint, which I tried to polish out as best as I could in order just to blend them in a bit, but there are a couple mistakes here and there. Nonetheless, I'm still really happy with the way the exterior is coming out, and I think it's looking really good so far.